All right, welcome to the very first episode of a series that I'm calling Things We Don't Talk About, Journal Entries from a Founder. And so the backstory here is I documented for myself the entire process of starting my first software company from inception and all of the early ideas that I thought were going to become the company, through failures, through raising venture capital, and through ultimately selling the business. And these journal entries were never meant to see the light of day. I was really protective with my password. I just didn't want them to get out because they were deeply personal. But I think in looking back, it's this valuable treasure trove of honest kind of dialogue with myself, that if you are a founder or you're thinking about being a founder, but I think predominantly if you are a founder right now, these might be some themes and some dialogues that you're very familiar with in your own mind. And my goal in sharing these is for not just entertainment purposes, but to make people feel less alone in the entrepreneurial journey. I think it helps when, if I can hear that another entrepreneur is struggling with things or thinking about things, I think that's really valuable to be open with. So this is the first episode, and let's see how it goes. I'm actually going to be reading. I printed it out. And I'll give a short little preamble before I start reading, set some context. And then afterwards, maybe we'll do a little bit of a retro on the post. So this first, and I only just read this for the first time, so this is dated back to February of 2012. Yeah, February 2012. And at this point in time, I had essentially just moved from Los Angeles, where I was waiting tables, to my mom's basement, where I had made this commitment. I've shared this in other episodes. I made this commitment that I was going to not leave my mom's basement, which was not a very nice place. It flooded with 2 inches of water every winter. But I was really grateful to have the opportunity to move home and not have to pay rent. So I moved in that basement, and I wasn't allowed to leave it until I'd started a software company. So this must have been within that first 3 months, maybe. So let's get into it. And sorry, at this point, for context, I worked on two different concepts before landing on the third concept that was the company that we actually started. So in this one, I reference the second of those concepts. All right, let's dive in. My mind is running slower than usual for this hour. Went for a nice run somewhere, around 5 miles, at about a 7:30 per mile pace. Not too shabby. I'm going to meet up with later today to catch up and discuss his present involvement with Tell It in 10. And Tell It in 10 is the name of the project that I was working on at the time, the startup. I'll explain more after. I'm not at all worried about it. He's a talented programmer, but the distance and his flighty time commitment isn't really helping his case. I think I'm going to propose that if he can pick a fixed schedule and stick to it, including 1 day locally, then we can continue working together and just restart his vesting schedule at a lower percentage. On to the next page. I like sitting, thinking, and writing. I'd like to be able to write for some sort of publication, digital, print, whatever. I suppose it all comes back to wanting to have a voice. About something. Be known for something. Be somebody. I'm already someone. I know, but I want to claim. Is that even the right word? Jesus, I need some income. I need to raise $1 bajillion and do some cool ass shit. Then my Twitter description can read, doer of cool ass shit. Bam. At this point, I'm just free writing. I better stop. Duty calls. Whatever that duty is. Ha. So that's a funny little excerpt. I must have been 22. Yeah. 21 or 22 when I wrote that. So yeah, so it's kind of cool to see where my head was at with things. Tell It in 10 for context. Horrible name. horrible name. It was, so at the time I went to art school, and this was when Facebook was blowing up, and everyone was just dumping. Like, they'd go on a trip and they'd put like all 100 photos from their trip on Facebook. And it drove me nuts as a photographer. I was like, oh, can't people just like, has anybody ever heard of curating? And so Tell It in 10 was a platform where people could sync it with their Facebook, and then they could curate these like stories that were 10 photos. So Tell It in 10 photos, 10 photos long, and they could caption stuff, and then they could share a link to that curated story rather than the whole thing. And on the tech side, it was actually pretty cool. We like scraped and indexed all of the metadata and comments attached to each photo on Facebook so that we could search for keywords. So you could be like, show me photos of my buddy Gus and I in Mexico drinking beers. And it would find like a photo that the metadata from the camera said it was in Mexico. And then someone in the comments was like, dude, you guys are crushing those beers. And boom. So it made photo discovery really easy at a time when you couldn't just search that way in your iCloud or wherever your photos are. So anyway, that's what it was. Didn't get much traction, but I met a lot of cool people in the Portland tech startup scene. And really that was how I got my start. Ultimately, that was what connected me to our first investors for the later idea. So, yeah, it was a fun time, a silly time. It was a fun time. All right, that's it for the very first installment of this series. I would be curious. Let me know in the comments, like, do you relate to this? Did you go through a period of time where you're talking to yourself, or am I just crazy? What was life like for you? Where were you in your early 20s when you're 21 or 22 like I was? Let me know below. I'm curious.